Luxembourg City is a tiny cozy town at the border of France, Belgium, and Germany. People there are tempted to remain what they are since it's the national motto: we want to remain what we are. You may very well meet and have a conversation with the Grand Duke hiking in a forest, as it happened to me. And forget, Luxembourg is also one of the European Union capitals. Then, let's try to answer this question: how walking in Luxembourg city streets inquires European identity. We believe this is of interest to our Chinese audience, as it is about Europe as a whole, and many Chinese visitors come to Luxembourg as the neighboring city of Trier, Germany, the birth town of Karl Marx. Let's start Rue Jules Villem, in a quiet area called Clausen. It is the place where Robert Schumann, one of the fathers of Europe, was born in 1886. This man is remembered today because he signed the Schumann Declaration, which started the European coal and steel community. The idea was revolutionary. Coal and steel, especially in the 50s, were strategic goods necessary to reconstruct an economy, but also to build tanks. Making France and Germany share coal and steel created a material impossibility to make war against each other. This is not the European Union yet. This is not even French-German reconciliation yet, but it is already peace. The European idea starts with this willing of peace. The Schumann Declaration was signed the 9th of May 1950. The 9th of May has been declared then Day of Europe. In Luxembourg City, it is a public holiday. So is peace part of the European identity? Certainly so. And it is easy to understand that if you turn right and follow the street down to the German soldiers' cemetery, just a few meters from Schumann House. The Grand Duchy of Luxembourg was occupied by Germans many times. When it was home for Prussian garrison in the 19th century, during World War I, and during World War II. The German cemetery is a testimony of every expansionist attempt, and dead people are the traces led by war. The Second World War was so devastating that between 60 and 80 million people died, mostly in Europe, mostly civilians. It is like the entire population of today's France and Belgium vanish. Not to mention the ruins, not to mention the mourning, not to mention the feeling of guilt. The richest and more powerful countries in the world torn apart by nationalism, racism, totalitarianism, and weapon of mass destruction. A real suicide for every nation. European identity probably begins with this nausea caused by war and a deep willing for peace. We do not know if Schumann himself was influenced by this cemetery just near his birth house, but it is easy to understand how a man like him, born near the border of France and Germany, had to suffer because of war. Schumann's complex national identity is maybe a key to understand how you become a great European. Robert Schumann led the French government and was Minister of Foreign Affairs in the 50s. He was a French politician, repeatedly elected Member of Parliament in Moselle. But history made his identity complex. Schumann's father was a French person born in a village near the Luxembourg border. But after the Prussian victory against France in 1871, the area became German, and so on for Mr. Schumann, new citizen of the German Empire who decided to move in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Here, this new German former French married a Luxembourgish lady who spoke first Luxembourgish, but also German and French, like most of her fellow citizens in the Grand Duchy. Hence, little Robert, born in 1886, was a German citizen at first, because his father was German, but raised in an international family with many languages and cultures. He became a German lawyer in Metz, city of then Reichsland-Elsass-Lothringen. Logically, he was mobilized in the German army during World War I and wore a German uniform. But the Germans lost this war, and Metz returned to France in 1980. Then, at the age of 32, Robert Schumann became a French citizen and a politician. 21 years after that, the Second World War occurred. Robert Schumann was part of the French government at that time, and during the German occupation, he was arrested by the Gestapo and detained and imprisoned by his former fellow German citizens. And yes, it is complicated, and it is probably this complex identity between Germany and France which led to this new idea. Why not try peace for once? Let's go back to the left and try to climb the slopes of the Kirsberg Plateau, facing Luxembourg Old City. Just 50 years ago, this was still a place for potatoes and cabbage. It is easy to see the place was outside the city when you cross Tourmalakoff, a trace of the formidable Luxembourg fortification when the city was known as Gibraltar of the North, and a strategic peak disputed by Burgundy, Spain, France, Austria, Prussia. War and peace, again, are a key to understand this city and the European identity. Climbing the hill, on the left, lies the oldest Jewish cemetery in Luxembourg City. Some of the important Luxembourg Jewish families have their grave here, but unfortunately, certainly not the corpse, since the Nazi profaned the graves during World War II. They used dynamite to get rid of any Jewish symbol. After the war, the graveyard was ruined and desolated, and the graves visible today are the ones restored by the city of Luxembourg after the war. This reconstruction is interesting because it inquires an aspect of the European identity, a reaction against anti-Semitism and all kinds of discrimination. Europe is where the Holocaust occurred. An important aspect of the new European identity is not to forget this crime and promote human rights. In 1993, the Copenhagen criteria require that any country eligible to join the European Union must respect democracy, the rule of law, and the respect of minorities. Here we are, top of the hill, finally, the Kirsberg Plateau. Here lies a building typical of the 70s, constructed by a Luxembourgish architect, Pierre Bohler. This place is historically important because it is the first European Parliament, before the big one we have now in Strasbourg. Luxembourgish people refer to it as die Kleingequeb, the small raven, which is strange because it doesn't look like a raven. The explanation lies in the fact Luxembourgish people call a big urbanistic project a raven. And for the European Parliament, the first idea was to do something
very big by French architect Roger Talibert, who just constructed the Montreal Olympic Stadium. This project immediately created a big opposition among the population, who thought it was too modern, too big, too expensive. And yes, this one looked like a little bit like a raven. They called the project Big Raven, and it was soon abandoned. Referring to that, the smaller Luxembourgish project was then named Small Raven, and that's exactly the problem. It is actually too small, and that's one of the reasons the European Parliament moved to Strasbourg in a much bigger building. Anyway, this is a place of significant historical importance. The first time a European democracy took place. In the future, we may compare this institution to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., or Westminster in London. And it started here, in this very place where you can see no tourist, no plaque, no explanation of any sort. You can even rent the place like any convention center. This modesty, this discretion, is probably one of the other aspects of the EU identity. The building has been included in a much bigger complex, the European Convention Center of Luxembourg, where you can see the first Luxembourg skyscraper, Alcide de Gasperi building, which was known at that time as the Tower because, get this, it was actually the only tower in the country. This complex is the very center of European power because it is where lies the European Council. The Council, it's the collective body of the leaders that defines the European Union overall political direction and priorities. It is very important. And it's here. Well, it's here, but only in April, June, and October, because following the rules set out in the treaties, the Council of the European Union meets in Brussels the rest of the year. The rest of the time it is for rent. Anybody can sit in President Charles Michel's chair. This constant move from Luxembourg to Brussels, from Brussels to Strasbourg, do not make life easy for European civil servants and politicians. So, may unnecessary complexity be a part of the European identity? This idea is confirmed by the fact Luxembourg is still home of the European Parliament Secretariat when the rest of the institution moved to Strasbourg and Brussels. Let's cross the main avenue. Once a motorway, this main street links the European area to Luxembourg city centre by the spectacular Grand Duchess Charlotte's Bridge that everybody here calls the Pont Rouge because, well, it is actually red. Anyway, a street like that, the main street downtown linking all the European institutions, how would you name it? Charles de Gaulle Boulevard? No, would be too French. Winston Churchill Avenue? No, too British. Johann Sebastian Bach Chaussee? Would be too German. Let's see what's the real name of the street. Atlanticism, another aspect of the European identity? Probably. And it is true that without the Marshall Plan, which contributed so much to the reconstruction, and without the fear of communism during the Cold War, Europe would have certainly continued to be apart. American nuclear umbrella was convenient and saved so much resources which would have been lost in military spending. When Donald Trump questions this American protection, European Union feels the danger. So Are the United States of America the other father of Europe? Crossing JFK Boulevard, two institutions shows what is the real impact of EU for this continent. The first one is the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the biggest building in the city by French architect Dominique Perrault. With this building, you don't have the traditional complexity and modesty of Europe. This is a practical achievement necessary to make 27 countries live together. CJEU is the chief judicial authority of the EU. It is where legal disputes are resolved between national governments. In other words, that's a federal institution necessary to make 27 countries work together, probably the art of a discreet and slow European unification. The creation of a European public prosecutor in 2020 goes even further. Previously, only national authorities could investigate and prosecute crimes and could not act beyond their border. This is maybe the future European FBI, and it works maybe because nobody knows. The other one is the European Investment Bank, the biggest multilateral lending institution in the world, twice the size of the World Bank. Its members are the 27 EU members, and its role is to invest in national projects in the EU and abroad. When you see a European flag in a construction project, it means it has been partly financed by the European Investment Bank. Well, this is big and powerful, and again, not very well known by the general public.
So walking in Luxembourg city streets inquires European identity. War, peace, human rights, modesty, America, but not Trump, extreme complication, justice, and finance are probably the words which may define today European Union identity.
To finish, let's see the Schumann monument just near the Pont Rouge. It is the kind of statue near a major road that nobody really notices. Very European in a way. Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievement, which first create a de facto solidarity. Thank you, Mr. Schumann. That's the best definition of European identity.